On the campaign trail, I've learned that many people talk. Only a few have something to say. I'm honored to introduce Michelle Malkin because she has something to say about what it means to be an American and how much we care for our great country. Michelle describes herself as a mother, wife, blogger, conservative syndicated columnist, author, and Fox News Channel contributor. She was born in Philadelphia, raised in New Jersey, and now lives in Colorado Springs with her husband, Jesse, and their two children. A graduate of Oberlin College, Michelle started out in the newspaper business and became a syndicated columnist in 1999. Today, she is one of the most influential conservative writers in America, one of the 5 best-read national conservative bloggers in this country. Michelle has written 4 books, 2 of which have been #1 bestsellers. Her most recent book, Culture of Corruption, Obama and His Team of Tax Cheats, Crooks, and Cronies, was the #1 on the bestseller a week after it was published. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Malkin.
Thank you. Thank you, fellow Westerners. Thank you. I love being among the angry mob out here, out west. You'll have to pardon my voice. I've been losing it. I've been fighting a summer cold, and I'm sure all of my hate mailers and MSNBC and the New York Times are very happy that I'm losing my voice. But thanks to so many innovations in new media, all of us in this room have a voice like we've never had before. And boy, is that making the left mad. Or, to use one of my favorite adjectives and the title of my 3rd book, unhinged. I have had more fun covering the political scene over the last 2 years than I have in my entire career in daily journalism. And I've been at it a long time. You know, it's funny, I hear from a lot of people who are only discovering me for the first time because they see me on Fox News, but in fact, I started my career in newspapers at the LA Daily News in 1992. I survived the Seattle Times in the mid-1990s, or rather they survived me. And after spending about a decade in the Beltway swamp, I was, thanks to new media, able to cut myself off and liberate myself from the dead weight of the Washington culture and move out here. And it's been the best, most wonderful decision I've ever made in my life. I've shared this with many of my neighbors and friends and folks that I've come across after living in Colorado for the last couple of years. But I have to tell you, especially those of you who are native Coloradans, that I thank God that I live here. This really is God's country. And I moved here for a number of reasons. And you should know that there's sort of been a little stimulus program that I've now been involved in because people are hearing that I live in the Springs and they live in godforsaken places like California. And they want to move here too. Sorry about that. There's so much to commend this state and this region, the quality of life, the cost of living, and particularly the quality of education. I have 2 young kids. I've got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. And as some of you know, we are very fortunate to be participants in a charter school in Colorado Springs that sees its mission not as propagandizing and brainwashing our children and using them as guinea pigs in their Alinskyite experiment, but in taking their roles seriously as guardians and protectors of our children's academic careers and intellect, and in imparting to them a knowledge base and a common core and common culture. This has been lost on the left, abandoned, poisoned by the likes of the people who brought Barack Obama into this world. Our battle is not just a political one. It is a cultural and educational one, and that's why gatherings like this are so important, and the work that Bill Armstrong and CCU and John Andrews and the Centennial Institute and all of the sponsors of this event are doing is so important. You know, I've said that the ballot box is the ultimate sanitizer, and we have a lot of important work to do come this fall, come 2012, but it's not the only work we have to do. And in fact, that work in the political sphere is not the most fundamental work that we have to do. The work that we have to do is in our own backyards, where the culture of corruption that I talk about at the national level in Chicago on the Potomac, the culture of corruption that's happening in our own backyards, in the city councils, in the state legislature, in our public schools, where too many kids, our kids, are being held hostage by groups like the unions and the teachers' unions who see these kids not as their charges for which they are responsible for, but as cash cows and political pawns. The topic that I was assigned was Sweet Land of Liberty. And I've never taken for granted the blessings that I've had here. And I think it is one of the most important things to impart to our children, a sense of gratitude as opposed to a sense of entitlement, a sense of humility as opposed to a sense of hubris, and a sense of awe and reverence for those who established our country and made it great, as opposed to a sense of contempt. I went to Oberlin College, as Ken mentioned, and as some of you who might be familiar with that bastion of unhinged liberalism, once again, I say I survived Oberlin, but I think they survived me. I was treated as another trinket of color. And this really was my first experience with liberal racism and liberal hypocrisy. That at the same time, the tenured radicals and social engineers were telling people with skin color as brown as mine that institutional racism was holding us down. They had institutionalized racism on this campus. From the day that I stepped onto it, I was assigned to live at Asia House. Because at the time, my maiden name was Maglalang. And because my maiden name was Maglalang and my skin was brown and my eyes looked like this, it was automatically assumed that I would step onto the liberal plantation and stay there for the rest of my natural life. So here they are preaching diversity at the same time that they instilled in their students of color the worst kind of liberal ultra-orthodoxies and conformity. I wasn't always the big mouth that I am. And I have Oberlin and its tenured radicals in large part to thank for bringing me out of my shell. And I'll tell you, I've met a lot of minority conservatives of my generation and younger who have very similar stories. And I always tell my 10-year-old daughter, who's very shy, that I started out that way. I didn't want to be the nail that was sticking out. In fact, when I was in 7th grade, I failed a speech class because I got up and was paralyzed in front of all of these eyes looking at me, and I couldn't open my mouth. But when I got to Oberlin, I saw that nobody else was going to do it. And it was, there was a very specific event that drove me out of my shell. Many of you are familiar with the writer and thinker Dinesh D'Souza. We had brought him to campus to speak about his first and best book, Illiberal Education. And when he got to campus, he spoke at Finney Chapel, historic chapel in the middle of the Oberlin campus. And I was mortified to see several hundred minority students showing off their Oberlin tolerance by turning their backs on him and shouting at the top of their lungs, "Dinesh, Dinesh, Dinesh D'Souza, don't let the white man use ya." The parents who were spending $20,000, $30,000 a year for that English degree at Oberlin, I'm sure were bursting with pride at that couplet. So this is what motivated me to finally speak up. Because as so many of you who are getting involved in and engaged in public debate and the political process for the first time, especially over the last couple of years, appreciate, if you don't speak up for you, no one will. No one will. And as many of you who are involved in the Tea Party movement, the 9/12 movement, who are just getting involved in the first time, also know you need a thick skin if you're a conservative in this battlefield. Particularly, and let me give a shout out to all the women in this audience. You know, Sarah Palin has talked recently about the Mama Grizzly movement. And now that I've returned to the West after being in LA and Seattle and now settling here in Colorado, I particularly appreciate that moniker. But before there were Mama Grizzlies, there were national security moms. And before there were national security moms, there were soccer moms. And before there were soccer moms, there were many founding mothers and grandmothers in the grassroots conservative movement who were doing the heavy lifting for us. And I always pay homage to one of my inspirations, Phyllis Schlafly. One of the original cultural warriors before there were culture warrior segments on The O'Reilly Show. And one of the phrases that has always resonated with me, that she is responsible for, and that is very germane as we head into the next election cycles, is that we need choices, not echoes. I could continue writing culture of corruption updates until I filled a whole library for the rest of my natural life. But all of that work would be for naught. All of the exposing of the lies and the hypocrisy and the transparency undermining and the sovereignty undermining. It's all for naught if we do not have real alternatives. And if there was any lesson from the last presidential election cycle, it is this. If you put a shadow of Barack Obama up against Obama, Obama is going to win. We need people who do more than pay lip service to conservative values and conservative precepts and principles. And this has been the message of the last year and a half. Enough. Enough. In a word, that was the message that disgusted taxpayers across America were sending, who were fed up with the confiscatory policies of both major political parties in Washington. Limited government principles will not win until we reckon with the fact that George W. Bush pre-socialized the economy with billion-dollar bailouts of the financial and auto industries. Barack Obama, of course, is pouring billions more down the government sinkhole, but it was already carved out for him when he got to office. Now, The taxpayer, the camel's back, isn't just broken. Our neck and our four legs have all snapped too. And that is why people are saying, enough. This is why millions of Americans have joined things like the Tea Party movement to protest reckless government spending in the pork-laden stimulus package, the earmark-clogged budget bill, the massive mortgage entitlement program, taxpayer-funded corporate rescues, the environmentally fraudulent cap and tax monstrosity, and the debt-exploding healthcare takeover. As I've said from the beginning, contrary to these false left-wing and Democrat smears, that all of the hastily planned impromptu events that led to the Tea Party birth somehow were astroturfed. Those crowds were packed with first-time grassroots activists, people with families and day jobs, people whose usual definition of community organizing involves neighborhood yard sales and soccer matches. These, you, were the members of the silent majority who decided to be silent no more. It was incredible following and reporting in the blogosphere as this movement took hold. And I remember the early days when these protests were breaking out in places like Santa Monica, in San Francisco, where I've got this whole file of the greatest Tea Party signs ever. And out of San Francisco came one of the signs that I think is one of the most quotable and memorable of the time that I've covered politics. And it said this: Obama, stop apologizing for America. Start apologizing to America. I was at one of the first Tea Parties in Washington, and there was a young lady who held up this huge sign, like a life-size sign, that said, "Your mortgage is not my problem." And that is what gives me hope for change in the culture of entitlement. Liberty, all the stimulus we need. I like that one. No taxation without deliberation. Now, here in Denver, some of you might have joined me and a lot of other great folks for the big pig roast. Anyone there? That's right. We roasted a pig. We were there before they even called it a Tea Party movement. And I stood among many people who shared many common concerns, not just about our economic liberty, but also about our national security. And it's this kind of alliance that is really going to ensure the future for our kids. So I stood beside people on one side who had a wonderful sign that said, "Who is John Galt?" And taxed enough already. In Mesa, Arizona, taxpayers came out against President Obama, who was pushing a massive mortgage entitlement expansion at the time. And the great thing about this movement is we can retain what the left lacks, and that is a great sense of humor. So the protesters came out and they jeered the culture of entitlement with posters demanding, "Give me Pelosi's plane, annual passes to Disneyland, stimulate the economy, give me a tummy tuck." I want one of those. Count me in on one of those. And my favorite, "Give me liberty, or at least a big screen TV." Then we had those congressional town halls, the big revolt in the long, hot summer last year. Taxpayers challenging their representatives to start reading the bills before ramming them down our throats. Powerful refrains that we first read about and heard about, not in the New York Times, not on Katie Couric's broadcast, but on blogs, on foxnews.com, on YouTube, on Twitter, and in social networks. And we heard citizens stand up to these entrenched incumbent creatures and say, if government-run health care is good enough for us, why won't you legislate it for yourselves? We heard them say, do you work for us or do we work for you? And of course, one of the powerful refrains of the last couple of years, can you hear us now? John Edwards was right about one thing, and that is that there are two Americas. One America is full of moochers. You know who I think of? Peggy the Moocher. Remember her? She was that Obama bot in Florida who was caught on a local TV newscast gloating because when Obama got elected office, she was going to get her rent paid and her gas paid. That's a threat. That's the threat. You know, it's not merely that we have the corruptocrat in chief sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania with his team of Chicago thugs. It's that we have too many people like that who've been raised in that culture, who see no shame in waiting for the nanny state to deliver them everything from cradle to career to grave. It is a small leap from that to the moochers, small and large, corporate and individual, trampling all over themselves with their hands out, demanding endless bailouts. The other America, over here, shaking their heads, full of disgusted, hardworking citizens, getting sick of getting played for chumps and getting punished for practicing personal responsibility. Another inconvenient truth and reminder. Before this grassroots revolt, this taxpayer counterinsurgency took them by surprise. Beltway Republican strategists were arguing fervently that the party's traditional, old, outworn focus on quaint things like taxes and spending was outdated. These are the rebranders. We need to rebrand. Right? What were they doing? They were pitching their own expansive ideas to replace the anti-tax and spend agenda with what? With Obama Light. How's that working out for you? Now these same people all talk like us. Isn't that a miracle? All of a sudden, the same people who were trashing the grassroots, the conservative base, now pandering to us. Wow, that's refreshing. Thanks. They have finally realized that what's resonated across this country is a nonpartisan call to roll back the pork, hold the line on taxes and spending, end the endless government bailouts, and stop the congressional steamrollers who have pushed through mountains of legislation without deliberation. It's the 3 T's, stupid. Too many taxes, trillions in debt, and transparency. Now it's conventional wisdom. The path to lasting hope and change lies with those who can make a credible case that they will support and defend fiscal responsibility. And now it is the time for all good taxpayers to turn the tables on free-lunching countrymen and their enablers in Washington. Community organizing helped propel Barack Obama to office, and guess what? It can work for limited government conservatism too. But that's not all. That is not enough. And I've talked about the necessary alliance between economic conservatives and national security conservatives. it is very important that we make common cause, and I am representative of both of these things. Ever since I started my career in journalism and in the conservative movement, I've had two primary focuses. And one is on limited government and the economic sphere, and the other is national security. My first book was called Invasion. It came out in 2002, and I made a very simple point with a very simple thesis. Immigration and our entrance policies, first and foremost, must be treated as national security issues. To provide for the common defense. That is the constitutional mandate, one of the most basic, fundamental duties that is charged to this government. Not to ensure diversity, not to provide a job to every willing worker in the world. Article 4, Section 4. Why don't we ask Sheryl Crow if she knows what Article 4, Section 4 charges the government with? I know the people who are laughing know what I'm talking about. She was interviewed recently, over the last week, deriding the intellect of Tea Party folks and conservatives. I'd like to see her on Celebrity Jeopardy with a couple of Tea Party leaders. Let's see who wins. She'd probably do about as well as Wolf Blitzer. You know what I'm talking about? This great YouTube video he was on, and he got negative. He was in negative territory at the end of Final Jeopardy. Smarty pants. I want to go on Jeopardy. I want to go on Jeopardy. Article 4, Section 4 talks about the duty of our government to protect the states against invasion. This is where the title of invasion comes from. It is not racist, it's not xenophobic, it is not immigrant bashing to expect that our government fulfill this fundamental duty. And it was my naive hope, after the September 11th, 2001 attacks, that people would embrace my thesis. Instead, I was called all sorts of names, met with all sorts of ad hominem attacks, as were so many warriors in this movement. And I do have to single out and give a special shout out to my friend Tom Tancredo. Because he was there from the very beginning, and he is someone who understands American history and our place in the world and the need to define ourselves by our common interests and to emphasize assimilation over amnesty. And this is what I mean by people who walk the talk instead of just pay lip service when they're down in the polls or when they need to make election year conversions and all of a sudden start chumming around with the Border Patrol. John McCain. A good friend of mine from Southern California, a man some of you may know, not a marquee name, not somebody that you saw every night on cable TV, but a warrior in this area, Terry Anderson, died last week. He died of pancreatic cancer, and I didn't know. I wasn't aware. He was an American who was black, but he'd never say that. He was an American, period. He lived in South Central Los Angeles. He lived in South Central Los Angeles, and he had a talk show that was devoted to our borders, our culture, our sovereignty. And he was one of the true mavericks, to use that overused word, but he was a true maverick. And he had a couple of special phrases that I'll never forget. And one is, well before you had Keith Olbermann talking about the worst American in the world, or whatever he is called it. I think I've won that like 10 times or 20 times. Well, before he was on the scene, Terry Anderson had on his show a feature that he called the most horriblest clown of the week. Most horriblest, and I loved how he said the most horriblest clown of the week. And he didn't discriminate based on party. That's what I loved about him. He was a true independent, fiercely independent. And he would call out the open borders radicals in both parties. He had another famous phrase. And anytime he'd show up at a Secure Borders rally or supported Mothers Against Illegal Immigration, he'd say, if you ain't mad, you ain't paying attention. And I need that on a T-shirt or a bumper sticker, because it's so true. But at the same time that he would get everybody's blood pumped up and working on these issues, he was very much a Reaganist happy warrior, because he believed in this country and he was grateful for everything that he was allowed and able to do. And he didn't have that sense of grievance mongering that the rest of the so-called civil rights movement has instilled in so many of my fellow people of color. So I hope you'll say a prayer for his family. And for those of you who don't know him, you can listen to archives of his show on the internet. You know, it sort of stops my heart a little, because, of course, you never pass away completely if you have a Twitter account. And his Twitter account is still up and live, and you know, he was doing radio shows almost right up until the day he passed. It's also a reminder that if you have heroes like this in your lives, to thank them, because I wish I had had the opportunity to talk to him more recently than I did, and I hope he hears me. And people like that give you courage, because God knows the kind of hell he must have received for saying the things that he did. You know, every once in a while I open up my own mailbag, and I did this week after I appeared on the Hannity show and talked in defense of the Arizona law. And the usual nasty, foul-mouthed liberal suspects came out of the woodworks, right? And they have common themes. I wrote about this in Unhinged. And one is to tell me to go back to where I came from. South Jersey. Talk about profiling, huh? Right? All right, go back to where I came from. And the second is just a very crude and vulgar theme that seems to run through a lot of the liberal critiques of what I do, which is, shouldn't you be a Filipino barmaid or a mail-order bride somewhere? And, you know, when I was younger and when I started out, it bothered me a little bit, but it gives you a lot of insight into liberal pathologies. And I hate to play, you know, pop psychologist here. Oh, yes, no, actually, I do. But what does that tell you? You know, when some leftist sees a brown-skinned girl on TV and assumes that she's doing the white man's bidding. Ha, tell my husband that I'm doing the white man's bidding. But on a serious note, and just returning to this theme of Sweet Land of Liberty, there's nothing like traveling abroad to remind you of how much we have to be thankful for, right? And a couple of years ago, I had the great honor, privilege, and opportunity to travel to Iraq. I was embedded with an army unit in Baghdad for a couple of weeks. I was on the ground and got to see the surge tactics before the surge was officially announced in January 2007. And it was my first time traveling in the Middle East. And the first place we had to stop before we got to Baghdad was Kuwait. And we got out of the plane, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I was in a restroom in the Kuwaiti airport, and there was a Filipino woman there. She was cleaning the bathrooms. And, you know, actually, I had my laptop with me, and so I was working in the bathroom. And she asked me what I did, and I said I was a journalist. And she said, "You're American?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You are so lucky." And she said she wanted to do what I did, and how could she get to where I was? And I thought about my parents and the decision they made to come here legally, and the process by which they came here, which was to prove that they learned English and to pay their legal bills and go through the medical screening and to have a skill and a commitment to staying in this country and embracing it and becoming American. And I thought about how easily I might have been in this woman's position instead of where I was. And that colored my whole entire trip. I mean, spending the couple of weeks that we did with the Army unit and seeing the brave men and women who put their lives on the line for us every day. And by the way, if there are veterans and service members here in the audience, thank you. God bless you. Another interesting encounter I had when we were there was pretty much a face-to-face encounter with Sharia law, because I had gone there on a trip for hotair.com, and I was accompanied by a male colleague of mine, but I was the one holding the credit card. And even in a liberal, supposedly liberal place like Kuwait, this was frowned upon. And I wasn't allowed to stay in the same room with my male colleague. I had to pay for 2 rooms. And when I was the one who handed over the credit card, you should have seen the faces of the people at the hotel. They couldn't, "What? Filipino? You're supposed to be cleaning the bathrooms, not paying for the hotel room." Which is really just a roundabout way of answering the left and saying, yeah, actually, I should just be in the subservient role that you think I should be in. I should just be what Keith Olbermann called me, which is just a mashed up bag of meat with lipstick on it. Yeah, he actually said that. Yeah, he actually got away with that. Yeah, what liberal media? I told my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, some of these stories. And when she watches TV with me in the regulated capacity that I allow, because that's our responsibility, not yours, Michelle Obama, I always point her to the wonderful female role models that we have out there. Whatever policy differences, political differences I may have, the fact that we have so many conservative women out there on the hustings, taking the kind of abuse on a daily basis that would never be tolerated if that was aimed at liberal women. It's a proud moment for the right. And I applaud each and every one of the founding mothers and sisters and grandmothers out there. Of course, we couldn't do what we do without you tolerant men allowing us to mouth off. So thank you, too. And I just want to give a couple of more shout-outs here as I wind down, and I can't wait for your questions. But I saw another great, longtime friend of mine, champion, warrior, Frank Gaffney of the Center for Security Policy. And when I talk about national security moms, I talk about the kind of moms who understand the message and the peace through strength agenda that Frank has long championed since he worked for the Reagan administration. And I urge you all to go to the site. It's called peacethroughstrength.com, because in the end, if we do not have candidates and public faces who are willing to defy the transnationalists and to stand up to the jihadists and the jihadi enablers and the fifth column that has infiltrated this country, none of us will be safe. It's not just about the culture of corruption in Washington. It's about the culture of destroying Western civilization that infects academia, the mainstream media, unfortunately, circles in both parties. Do your research, you'll see it. And I think the most important thing as we head into the fall elections in 2012 is to make sure that we are united economic conservatives, national security conservatives, in restoring American greatness, in restoring and defending American exceptionalism, and in making our founding fathers proud again. Thank you.
Michelle Malkin. Michelle Malkin. I was thinking, if the summit were a poker game, we'd hold a winning hand with the high cards, a pair of queens, 2 Michelles. Think about it, both tiny, both commanding, both funny, both fearless, and each of them can put a lump in your throat before you know what hit you. Get out of these women's way. Don't you love the idea of putting Michelle in charge of Celebrity Jeopardy? When those liberals are eliminated, they wouldn't just be humiliated, they'd be eliminated. I'm talking firing squad. We have time for a few questions before Michelle does a book signing. And once again, questions, not statements. Keep it succinct. Let's start over here.
Michelle, my name's Elliot Floyd, and I'm from Colorado Springs, and I wanted to thank you for coming out here today. My question's on the topic of immigration. The immigration topic's really complicated, and there's a lot of arguments out there. And 2 of the arguments that you sometimes will see for restricting legal immigration are protecting the environment and protecting American workers' rights to jobs. Do either of these arguments have a place in the conservative movement?
Tell me more what you mean about protecting the environment. Are you talking about population? Are you talking about the trashed southern border? Because I certainly think that we have a role in protecting the southern border, in particular from the pollution that's going on down there. And you can certainly hear that from all the folks in the border state who have to clean it up themselves because the federal government won't do it.
No, I think there's, if you look at some of the background of a few of the organizations, there's sort of there's a population control aspect.
I understand what you're getting at. There are groups like FAIR and John Tanton. I understand that libertarians in particular and some folks who are more on the open border side have concerns about. I myself do not subscribe to the ideas of eugenics and those kinds of environmental extremes, if that's what you're asking me about. But look, I am going to stand with anyone who believes, as I do, that we ought to have controlled immigration, that we should determine what the limits are, that we should determine the kind and character of people that should go in this country. And I also understand that there are many businesses who believe that legal immigration quotas should be expanded. They feel that they cannot find qualified workers to do their jobs. Reality check, there's 10% or higher unemployment in most of the country right now. So we can have a discussion at some point about what the numbers should be on things like H-1 or H-2B visas, sure. But the immediate problem at hand, if you haven't heard from Arizona, you certainly will start hearing this from other countries that are taking matters into their own hands, is that we have a problem with the back door. We have a problem with the revolving door. We have no control whatsoever. It is a systemic problem. I'm tired of hearing the phrase comprehensive immigration reform. That is a synonym for amnesty. I'm for comprehensive immigration enforcement reform. And let me be specific, because I think one of the flaws that when people that I see on TV, when they start talking about, when they understand that they should start talking about secure borders, they say, we need to secure the borders. What does that really mean? It is systemic, right? It starts overseas with our consular offices, right, who've been handing out visas like Pez candies in countries that are enabling and sponsoring jihad. And so people give me this supposed gotcha question. Well, your parents were from the Philippines. Should we limit visas from the Philippines? And guess what my answer is? Well, actually, the Philippines has a huge problem with a Muslim insurgency in the southern part of the islands. Yeah, I think our State Department officers should not be giving out unlimited amount of visas to young, single Muslim males from the Moro Islands in the Philippines. Yeah, we should do profiling. It's our sea ports of entry. It's our air ports of entry. It's the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of deportation evaders running loose across this country. That's crazy. Cannot the open borders people agree with us fear-mongering heathens that having illegal alien criminals who've not only overstayed their visas or crossed the borders illegally, but are also ignoring deportation orders from immigration judges, ought to be rounded up first. You know, we hear this canard. No, we can't deport all 12 to 20 to 30 to 40 million of them tomorrow. Whoever says that? I'm not saying that we should do that tomorrow. I'm saying let's do triage. Why don't we start with those deportation evaders? Why don't we have the kind of local, state, federal cooperation that Arizona preaches? Oh, and that, guess what? Even the Obama Justice Department supports with the 287G program. That's right. They're suing Arizona for doing the same kind of enforcement that they are training other officers across the land to do. Huh. Go figure. So you asked about the environment. What was the second one? So we're now addressing the idea of protectionist policies and America First. Well, yeah, I think I am an unapologetic America firster in this respect. I think that Americans should have first dibs on jobs. And I think that they should have first dibs on jobs over illegal alien workers. Yes, I don't think that illegal alien workers should get workers' comp. No, I don't think that the Department of Labor should make it a priority to reach out to illegal alien workers to expand their benefits and protections over American workers, period.
This will be the last question over here with Jeff, please.
Michelle, I want to thank you for pointing out the institutionalized corruption in our education system. And please don't interpret our silence at the end of those remarks as inattentiveness. I, for one, was jumping up and down in my mind. And I have a question for you. One is, do you consider that issue a root cause of the trends that we're dealing with today? And if so, with the momentum that it has, do you see any practical solutions to turning that ship around?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your passion about this issue. As it is with me, I am the daughter of a public school teacher, believe it or not, a public school teacher who was a forced member of the New Jersey Educators Association, one of the most corrupt, and that's saying something, of the teachers' unions in America. Oh, if only Chris Christie had been governor when I lived in New Jersey. I think that the same way that you've seen bottom-up revolts on everything from taxpayer issues to immigration, this is the way that that ship will change. And when I was in Washington State, one of the issues I covered was the grassroots revolt among teachers' union members against their big labor bosses. Washington tried to pass paycheck protection. And this is the idea of rank-and-file teachers rising up against the big labor unions, squandering all their money for political purposes. And a lot of teachers didn't realize that they could actually take steps to opt out and to get back their money. But of course, it made them huge pariahs in the teacher break rooms. It's hard to stand up and defy them, and you know why. I mean, we've seen it with the Service Employees International Union. They use the persuasion of power to get their way. And so it requires an entire community and school boards and city council members and parents to stand with those teachers who are willing to defy the big labor establishment. So, and there have been paycheck protection movements around the country. I think as a parallel to that, of course, there's the parental choice in education movement. And here is where one party is vastly different and contrasting with the other party. You look at DC. I read a great piece in the Daily Caller the other day by Bob Ewing of the Institute for Justice. It was basically an anatomy, basically a murder case of how the left and the teachers' unions destroyed the scholarship program for poor black students in DC. Guess which side Barack Obama was on? Well, we all know. And there are countless minority and poor parents across this country who would like nothing better than to rescue their kids and give them a quality education the way Barack and Michelle Obama are doing for Malia and Sasha. Why shouldn't they have the same opportunity? And here is where we get to show off and show how private philanthropy is rescuing those children. There are private scholarships that have taken those hostages out of the public school systems and given them those opportunities. It's happened here in Colorado. And then along with that, of course, the charter school movement. I mentioned that my kids go to a charter school. Well, it's in one of the most rundown parts of Colorado Springs. There's more ethnic and racial and class social diversity, there's that word, at this charter school than you'll see at a place like Chelsea Clinton and Molly and Sasha's school. You know, they preach academic achievement and excellence and diversity, but they certainly don't practice it. And pointing it out at every opportunity is another way to turn that sinking ship.
We could listen to Michelle all afternoon, but it's time for her to turn capitalist, sell and sign some books, Culture of Corruption, the Barnes & Noble book signing table right outside in the corridor behind you. And then further along that corridor into the Lone Tree Room, General Boykin will be signing books. We need 10 or 15 minutes that our devoted wait staff can turn this room and get it ready for the afternoon session. We will be back in here in 15 minutes. And once again, thank you, Michelle Malkin.